Hey, this is Mr. Jakes from Basement Brothers, coming to you from the US of A, where I've been reunited with my X68000 I sent here decades ago. Today I'm looking at an X68000 game I've always wanted to play through. It's Zoom's 1990 action RPG, Lagoon. I'm happy to report that nowadays the original X68000 version has a full English patch available, though as usual I'll be playing the unpatched version in Japanese. But like many of you watching, my first experience with Lagoon was the SNES port by Kemco, which was an early release on the system in North America. My brothers and I rented the game sometime in 1992, coincidentally enough, at the same time that we rented Ys 3 on the SNES. We couldn't help but notice that, hey, these games feel kinda similar to each other. And that's really no wonder, since when you think about it, both games were attempts to imitate the first two Ys games. Ys 3 being Falcom's own attempt to translate Ys 1 and 2's gameplay into a side-scroller, which of course was then ported by another company to the SNES, and Lagoon being, well, another company's deliberate attempt to imitate Ys 1 and 2. And if maybe you played the SNES version of Lagoon and thought it really wasn't that much of an Ys clone, I think the rest of this video should convince you otherwise. And I don't mean to use the term Ys clone in a negative way, I've always loved Lagoon. Ys clone. Is there any word more thrilling to the human soul? So anyway, here's the case for the X68000 version. Inside you can see where a previous owner stuck the Zoom sticker originally used to seal the case. In the manual, which has so many fun and silly illustrations, it makes me really feel that the people who made this must have really been proud of their game and characters. There are even a few short silly comics in the back. Next, there's sort of a poster / map of the game world. There's still an unused userdisk sticker here. And the game is stored on 4 discs, which consist of the system disk and 3 data disks. Here's data 1, data 2, and yep, here's data 3. To start the game, we insert the system disk in drive 0 and data 1 in drive 1. First of all, you gotta love the Zoom logo intro here, featuring the company's mascot character, Neko Dolucky. Dolucky would later get his own baseball, soccer, and puzzle games on the Super Famicom. I think Zoom, though, is probably best known for the Zero Divide games on the PS1 and Saturn, and maybe the Mr. Mosquito games on PS2. Phalanx is of course known for the North American cover art on the SNES port. But Zoom got their start here on the X68000, with 5 games released for the system. Lagoon was only their second game. Next is the title sequence, which is pretty similar to the SNES version, though it does scroll in the opposite direction and is lacking the clouds and cheap waterfalls. Wait here on the title screen in order to see the opening sequence. Now, this opening and the few cutscenes in the game are where the X68000 version handily beats the SNES port, with much more detailed graphics and tons of animation. When the opening scene is finished, we're asked to replace the system disk with a user disk if we have one, or to simply reinsert the system disk in drive 0 if we haven't created one yet, which I'll do. So we're dumped here near the entrance at the bottom of the first town, which differs from the SNES version where you start at the top. This first town music, by the way, has got to be the most memorable tune in the game. It's definitely the only one where I still remember the entire melody from renting the SNES version. I've heard many people declare the original X68000 soundtrack to be superior, with its FM sound and heavy use of 80 PCM in the percussion, as was the custom on the X68000. But you know what? I actually think that the SNES version does a pretty good job of holding its own. Sure, it is kind of one of those cheap-sounding SNES games, but I gotta say that the town music really does sound great here in its own right. Visually, the two games look nearly identical to me, probably thanks to the relatively simple in-game graphics they used in the original. Anyway, in the X68000 version, we have to create a user disk, so let's press F1 on the keyboard and select Make. The X68000's mechanical drive mechanism will automatically spit out the Data 1 disk from drive 1, which I'll replace with a pre-labeled and pre-formatted blank disk. The game will ask us to input a password. What it's referring to is this key sequence on page 8 of the manual. This is the game's rather weak form of copy protection. Anyway, we input the password and wait while the game creates the user disk. It's got to copy basically all the data from the system disk, since the user disk will remain inserted in this place throughout most of the game. Unfortunately, you do still have to use the system disk for the initial boot. When it's finished, we're asked to move the newly created user disk to drive 0 and put data 1 back in drive 1. We get 3 save slots on the user disk, as opposed to the SNES version's single save slot. In Lagoon, we take control of Nassel, renamed for some reason in the English SNES version to Nasir. In the SNES version, he was raised by a wizard named Matthias, and he's just visiting here in the town of Atlan. But in the original X68000 version, Nassel is originally from Atland, and he has returned here now after being merely trained by Matthias for a few years. And so here we can visit Nassel's home, which is a bakery where his mother and childhood friend Rhea work. Both of these characters were deleted for the SNES version. Other than that, what we need to do here in the first town is mostly the same. We are asked by the mayor to investigate why the water has suddenly become polluted and undrinkable here in the game's setting of Lakely Land. That's right, in the Japanese versions, instead of Lakeland, it's Lakely Land. Just then, Nassel and the mayor are interrupted by news that some townspeople were injured by monsters in the cave, which is the only way to travel between Atland and the next town. We learn that one of the townspeople is still trapped in the cave, and the mayor asks Nassel to rescue him. He gives him a letter to King Phillips, as well as enough money to buy all the equipment sold here in the first town. The equipment menu works exactly like it does in the PC versions of Ys 1. You press E on the keyboard and then highlight the equipment you want. Also copied from Ys 1 is the fact that you press I for the items menu and S for status. Weirdly though, if you're not using a gamepad, you use these two keys, XF1 and XF2 for jump and attack, as well as confirm and cancel. Most X68000 games just use Z and X instead. So anyway, now we can enter the first dungeon and encounter enemies for the first time. The SNES version is kind of famous for having a stupidly short attack range when you swing your sword, but in the original X68000 version, rather than swinging your sword, you instead have a bump attack system like in Ys 1 and 2. The only difference is that here you have to hold the attack button to draw your sword while you attack, similar to Zack 1. Attacking enemies in Lagoon is much easier in the X68000 version. Here the strategy is the same as in Ys, where you want to attack at a slight offset to the side rather than ramming them head on. But one difference is that you can pin enemies against walls, like in Zack 1, which is the easiest way to quickly take down enemies. In the SNES version, on the other hand, it's really hard to stand close enough to attack the enemies without getting hit. I find it works a little better when standing to the side. Why on earth did Kemco think it was a good idea to make your attack this short? Well, I have a theory. They just took the animation from the X68000 version when Nassel draws his sword and used that, instead of drawing new animation like they should have. Yes, I think they really were that lazy. And the short attack range becomes a really big problem on some of the bosses later.
Well, here we are, the star of the Blue Lagoon, and me, the blue-haired goon.
But if that's the biggest issue with the SNES version, here's the biggest issue with the X68000 version. When you die, and you probably will a lot when you get to a new dungeon or boss, rather than bringing up a continue screen right away like the SNES version, it takes you all the way back to the beginning of the game. Now, this might not seem like such a huge deal since you can then just load up your last save, but it actually takes a considerable amount of time to load the first town back up and then load the dungeon you were working on. This can become a big issue when you're trying over and over again on a boss. And the issue actually gets much worse than this after you get past the end of Data Disk 1 and are working on the later parts of the game in Data Disk 2 and 3. Then when you die, it asks you to insert data disk 1 again so that it can load up the first town, only so that you can once again replace it with the disk you were working on when you load your data.
What the? That's terrible!
What the hell? Didn't anybody playtest this game and say, you know, this is kind of annoying that it makes you switch disks for no reason? Far too often I have to wonder why some game developers insist on sabotaging their own games. Using an emulator with save states will allow you to bypass all of this, but on real hardware, this issue comes damn close to ruining the entire game for me, which is a shame because otherwise I really love the X68000 version of Lagoon. Anyway, we're just going to have to deal with this stupidity throughout the game, so let's move on. Like in the Ys games, you've really got to spend a bit of time leveling right away here in the beginning, before exploring too deep into the cave. Also, like in Ys, you can recover your HP by standing in place, but here you can do it even in the dungeons throughout the game. The first goal of this dungeon is to get outside to this mountaintop and find the person from town. You have to give him a potion from your inventory. In the SNES version, you then have to actually escort him as he follows you back to town, but none of the escort missions exist in the original. Here he says he can get back on his own, and he tells you to ask the old woman at the temple in town about the locked door in the cave. She gives you a sword which can't be used as a weapon, but will unlock the door. She also tells Nassel he should say goodbye to his mother before he leaves, since this will be the start of a long journey, leading to one more extra scene at Nassel's house that isn't in the SNES version. So we unlock the door in the cave and fight the first boss. Apparently a lot of players get stuck here. It's really hard to figure out exactly where and when we're supposed to attack this boss with the bump attack, and it's also super annoying being sent back to the beginning of the game every time you fail. I ended up having to do some more leveling before I could win. I know they wanted to have a cool 80 PCM sample for when the bosses die, but to me it just sounds like an elephant dying. Now we can walk out into the elf field. The overworld sections in this game are all a little empty and are really there just for doing a little leveling and earning money. At the north end of the field is the elf town, where the guard says, without a bit of sarcasm, "Oh good, it's the son from the bakery in Atland. Now we can rest easy." In the SNES version, he's the chosen warrior of light, but I kind of love how in the original Nassel is basically just a regular dude, though he was still trained by a great wizard, I guess, for a few years. And in the X68000 version, this town is where that wizard, Matthias, makes his first appearance. He explains the main conflict of the game. He thinks that his rival, Zera, who we also meet briefly here before he disappears, intends to take control of the sacred place at Lagoon Castle, where all magic power becomes magnified. He's plotting to kidnap Princess Felicia, since the royal family are the only ones who have the power to move Lagoon Castle and activate the sacred place. In the SNES version, instead of Matthias and Zera, this is where we meet Nassel's rival, Thor, for the first time, and there's an escort mission. I kind of like how in the SNES version they greatly expanded this character's role and his relationship with Nassel. In the X68000 version, we won't meet him until much later. Anyway, in the town, we learn that the next place we have to go is Philip's Castle, where Princess Felicia is said to be currently residing. It's another long and difficult dungeon, where at first I died a lot and had to deal with the loading time. But the dungeons do become quite fun once you get a foothold and can stay alive most of the time. Here we'll also obtain some better equipment and find some elves trapped in the castle. After that, we can go back to the mayor of the elf town and obtain a teleportation cape to give to the trapped elves, as well as our first magic staff of the game. In the X68000 version, your current magic is determined by the combination of which staff and sword you currently have equipped, and you do also need to obtain a crystal which corresponds with each staff before you can use them. In the SNES version, on the other hand, your swords don't affect your magic, and instead equipping different crystals along with the staves creates different spells. It's also nice that the SNES version has a dedicated magic button, R, while in the X68000 version you have to instead press both action buttons together. Even when using the keyboard, it's the XF1 and XF2 keys together, though they could have easily made a dedicated key. You also jump every time you press both buttons together, so it's impossible to use magic without jumping up and down like an idiot. Similarly, you may have noticed that I'm jumping whenever I talk to NPCs in this version, since you use the jump button to talk. One great thing about the X68000 version though, is that unlike in the SNES version, you can use magic on the bosses, which helps a bit here on the boss of Philip's Castle. Not being able to use magic on the bosses has got to be one of the stupidest aspects of the SNES version. Who thought it would be a good idea to make you fight all the bosses with this tiny butter knife, instead of the wide variety of different magic attacks you can use throughout the rest of the game? That might have actually been fun. Alternatively, in both versions you can also choose to spend your MP using rings for various status effects instead. There's really not enough MP to use both magic and rings at the same time, so it's kind of silly that they tried to incorporate both the magic attacks from Ys 2 and the rings from Ys 3 in one game. But since I've cleared Philip's Castle now, let's move on to Dwarf Desert! What? Those are the lyrics to the song. 11-year-old me was very certain of that when the words were displayed on the screen in the SNES version. Dwarf Desert. It's as obvious as the words to the Game Over music in Kid Icarus, or the title screen in Journey to Silius. So anyway, in Dwarf Desert, you find the village of the dwarves. I'm beginning to notice a pattern here. Here we can buy new equipment and obtain another magic staff. We get a letter from Thor, who we haven't met yet in this version. He's actually a nice guy in the SNES version, but in the original, he's just an asshole. The letter is to tell Nassel not to interfere in their plan. We also learn that Nassel's father, who is a blacksmith apparently, went to the lava cave nearby to obtain something called the Moonstone. The lava cave is the first part in the X68000 version where the jump actually needs to be used. Jump your way through this long tunnel to find Nassel's dad, who's happy to see Nassel again for the first time since his return from training. He says that the Moonstone is inside this cave, but he's been injured by the monsters and has to return to the dwarf town. So Nassel finds the Moonstone deeper in the cave, and we can bring it back to his father in the dwarf town. He says he will forge it into the legendary Moon Blade, but it will take some time. He gives Nassel a cold pot, which will allow us to get to the final room of the lava cave. Here's where we meet the Princess Pharisha for the game's first cutscene. She explains that she was captured by a man named Thor, but has managed to get away and run to this cave. Thor, she says, plans to use the sacred place at Lagoon Castle to conquer all of Lakely Land and rule it as his own. But speak of the devil, Thor comes to interrupt them. He calls Nassel the warrior of the Moon Blade and tells him again not to interfere in their plans. He takes Princess Pharisha away. In the SNES version, there is also a cutscene here, though it is quite minimal, and instead of Thor, here we're introduced to a new character who wasn't in the original. Anyway, in the original, we follow Thor and he sends a lava boss for us to fight. Defeat it, and we have to change over from Data Disk 1 to Data Disk 2 for the next part of the game. As I explained earlier in the video, from here on getting Game Over is also going to mean having to change discs. Oh boy. So now we're in the Valley of the Hobbits. Wow, this game has elves, dwarves, and hobbits. It's like the whole Tolkien trifecta. What's next? Ents? Here, as we've gone deeper into the polluted parts of Lakely Land, we arrive at a town ravaged by disease, where we can even talk to some of the spirits of the dead in an area below the church. In the SNES version, there's sort of a puzzle here where you have to talk to them in a certain order, but here you just talk to them all and they give you a new magic staff. And it's on to Siegfried Castle nearby. This is another one of the game's large dungeons, but all you need to know is that at the end we meet Thor again and are shown a cutscene of Lagoon Castle being raised into the sky atop a waterspout. In the SNES version, the scene is replaced by only a single shot of Lagoon Castle. From there, we're transported to a giant tree inhabited by gnomes, which serves as the final town of the game.
We live underground in a fiberglass tree.
Here we meet Nassel's childhood friend Rhea again, who says that Atland was attacked by monsters who kidnapped Nassel's father, while Rhea managed to escape. The gnomes give us a bell which will summon some nymphs, as well as a warm cape to allow us to survive in the next cave. This is another formidable dungeon and boss, but at the end we meet the nymphs, who give Nassel the final magic staff and send him to Phantom Hill, where they say he'll be able to travel to the heavens and Lagoon Castle, or as the English SNES version says, they blow him off to Phantom Hill. There are actually two parts where Nassel gets blown off in the SNES version. Phantom Hill reminds me a lot of the Ice Ridge of Noltea from Ys 2. Even the music kind of sounds similar to me. In the SNES version, there's another appearance of that added character, who serves as the only completely new boss for the SNES version. In the X68000 version, on the other hand, it's a little bit hard to figure out that you need to jump between these two hills. On the other side, we're going to get into spoiler territory, I think, so let's put a warning. And this applies to both versions of the game, by the way. Here we meet up again with Zera, the rival of Nassel's mentor, Matthias, who also appears to confront him. We learn that when the two of them were young and overconfident in their magic, they inadvertently unleashed an evil god on the world, and now Zera wants to take control of that god and use his power for himself. We find out that he is the one who raised Thor for the specific purpose of taking control of the god via the sacred place in Lagoon Castle. We watch Matthias and Zera fight each other in an epic pixel battle.
They're having a wizard's duel!
When it's over, Matthias will tell Nassel not to worry about him. Instead, we should take the lightning orb from Zera, which will transport him to the heavens. This is a short platforming section where at the end it's a little ambiguous that you have to jump down to this island. And if you don't jump in just the right spot, it's game over. From the island, we can finally enter Lagoon Castle, the final dungeon of the game. It's the largest dungeon with multiple objectives. First, you have to find Nassel's father, who has had the completed Moonblade stolen from him and can only give the hilt to Nassel. Next, we find the king and queen. It's hilarious, by the way, that the game continues to give you chests filled with gold, even though it's impossible at this point in the X68000 version to return to any town where you would be able to use it. Anyway, the king tells you how to get to the sacred place from the castle roof. Next, we find a mirror which will allow us to talk to Princess Felicia, who will deactivate all the force fields, preventing us from getting to certain parts of the castle. Then we can go to the terrace where we'll find the blade of the Moonblade, making it now equipable. And then we fight a boss, allowing us to get to the roof, where we can take another leap of faith to the sacred place. It's a short maze-like dungeon where we just have to find a boss room and fight a few bosses before we can fight Thor. In the SNES version, this has been replaced by an epic boss rush of 6 bosses, which took me tons of tries to beat. But in the X68000 version, I did it on my first try, and I wasn't even at the maximum level yet. I preferred the easier difficulty of the X68000 version overall, but it probably could have used a little more balancing in spots like this one. Anyway, when we beat Thor, he frees the princess before he dies, in his only act of kindness in the X68000 version. The SNES version has a much more elaborate plot where Nassel and Thor turn out to be brothers, both destined to protect this world, but in the original, the princess basically just thanks Nassel and lowers the castle back down to Earth. We are rewarded with a much longer and more fun ending here in the original though, with animation showing the castle and the fact that everyone's alright. We then get a cast list, and if you didn't like any of the spellings I used for the characters in this video, you can blame this ending. Then there's the staff role. Almost all of the staff at Zoom would go on to work at well-known game companies later. One guy we're going to have to mention, if not for his crazy chosen pseudonym alone, is Donald Tramp Tatsuo, who is actually Tatsuo Yamajiri. He would later work at Sega on games such as the Panzer Dragoon sequels and Sega Rally 2. He would then later work on some of the Mario Party games. After the credits, we get an enemy list, before some final shots of Nassel looking at the castle and the princess, before ending on a book that looks exactly like the case of the game. Then for some reason it shows a black screen where the BGM for the first town plays endlessly. Guess they were really proud of that first town music. But if you want to hear all the tunes of the game, at the screen at the beginning where it asks you to insert the user disk, instead insert data disk 3-4 times, and then insert the user disk. I can't get enough of watching the 5 Doluckies doing their random dance moves in this music mode. One thing that surprised me is that this game doesn't have any MIDI support, cause I always kind of assumed it did. Oh well, guess not. All the music in Lagoon, by the way, is really quite good. Even the unused tracks, which are here declared to be unusable. I'm pretty sure some of them are actually used in the game though. This video probably doesn't really need a port section since I've already shown so much of the only port. But to sum up the SNES version, it's much harder. It really isn't fun fighting the bosses due to the short range of your attack and not being able to use your magic. The plot, on the other hand, is greatly expanded in this version, and at first, though I thought of it as Kemco meddling with Zoom's original story, I eventually came to appreciate how much more detailed the plot is, and how everything comes full circle in the end. The X68000 story is really quite bare bones in comparison. Lagoon is a game that I'm really glad I finally took the time to play through, on both platforms. It's perhaps one of the best Ys clones ever made, and I really ought to love it. After all, it's one of my very favorite types of games from my favorite era of gaming, but the loading and disc changing issues at the game over screen in the X68000 version really do come very close to making the game unplayable in my opinion, which is a huge shame. One could be forgiven for getting the overall impression that the original X68000 version is some lost, superior version of the game that we missed out on, but the reality, of course, is a bit more complicated than that. Still, in the end, I gotta say I prefer the X68000 version, with its bump attack system and much more reasonable difficulty. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to do videos on X68000 games regularly. Due to space issues, I don't currently plan on keeping an X68000 at my home in Japan. My brother Neo Alec uses this one for capturing footage of the X68000 ports for my other videos. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at Zoom's 1990 X68000 title, Lagoon. Thanks for watching. Here's the current list of my patrons. I'll be getting back to PC98 and PC88 Paradise soon. Until then, please like, subscribe, and maybe even check out the Patreon. I'll be seeing you soon in the next video.